Hello everyone, and welcome back to more of the Labyrinth of Grisaia. In the last episode, we learned a little bit more about Yuuji's home life, and how after Kazuki unfortunately died, it kind of went to shambles because she was pretty much the only thing keeping it together. His father came home drunk, beat his wife, and Yuuji just couldn't take it anymore, and his wife couldn't take it, and they ran away, tried to start a new life. He found him. She basically just groveled at his feet. She didn't want to, be killed or anything or hurt her son. And anyway, they went back to their home life, and it was just as crappy as before. Surprise, surprise. So they ran away again. This time they went to a place where no one knew them and everything, and was more easily able to acclimate. So, yeah, unfortunately, here we go again. Everything was kind of going well. They both started to work. But what is going to happen? Find out in this episode. You know what? We're going to find out right now. Oh no. He found us again. He appeared abruptly one evening, just as my mother was putting on her makeup in preparation for her night job at the snack bar. Man, look at him. I had no idea how he discovered our whereabouts, but at that moment I was less shocked by my father's sudden arrival than by how dramatically he had changed. The stench of alcohol wafted from his body, stinging my nose. He'd always been a slender man, now his cheeks were hollow. His clouded eyes, sunken deep in their sockets, reflected the dim electric light with a sickly sheen. Glaring at the two of us as we stood there in shock, my father pushed his way into the room. And taking Mom's wallet from her handbag, he pulled out the 3,000 yen bills remaining inside and thrust them towards me. Taking the 3 bills, he practically slapped them in my chest. I looked up at my mother with pleading eyes. What do we do? What should I do? Just say the word. Tell me to fight, and I'll throw myself at him without the slightest hesitation. Mom answered my unspoken words with the pitifully artificial smile I knew so well. That smile made me incredibly sad. A year earlier, just before Mom and I fled, my father had owed his creditors about 32 million yen. That's like $350,000, give or take. I have no way of knowing exactly how the man spent that year, but it's probably safe to assume he kept up a less than responsible lifestyle. In fact, it seems he's sunk so deeply into self-indulgence that his debt ballooned to many times its original size. And just to top things off, his late alcoholism had returned with a vengeance. The man had ignored us totally for a year after our escape. Why track us down now? What was the point? I have to assume he was looking for money. Not that we had any to give him, of course. We were barely getting by ourselves. Mom had apparently been putting aside what little she could in hopes of sending me to college. But we were struggling just to keep food on the table. Everything we had in the world wouldn't have made a dent in the amount he owed. It was indescribably frustrating to buy that man alcohol with money Mom and I had saved by pinching every penny. Still, neither of us knew how to fight back. As I returned home after buying a 2-liter bottle of shochu at the neighborhood supermarket, a grimy little K-car parked near our house caught my eye. On my way out, still reeling from the shock, I hadn't even noticed it was there. It must have been the vehicle my father had driven here. Had he sold off the foreign car he used to own for some quick cash? Peering in the window as I passed, I could make out a pile of empty Chuhai cans and a dirty blanket inside. My father just might have been living in that thing. Pathetic. A man who drove a car like that had sunk his claws into us yet again. What was going to happen to me and my mom now? I mean, even for a child, the thought was enough to prompt a nauseating wave of fear and disgust. I hate him. I wish he'd just die. The words oozed up from somewhere deep inside me like toxic sludge. A shiver ran down my spine. When you wish for something like that, it might come back to haunt you someday, just so you know. Just like when my sister died. I'll regret it in the end. Regret it? Really? Would I really feel anything if that leech of a man ended up dead? Just knowing that I'd bought that bottle of alcohol for him, I could barely keep myself from smashing it against the ground. How much could I regret the death of someone like him? I don't know. I squeezed the bottle's shochu tightly and bit my lower lip, trying to calm down. But in that moment, I heard glass breaking inside the house and Mom screamed. Mom? A bewildering storm of emotion surged through me. Uncertainty, fear, anger, but even so, I knew I had to help Mom. Rushing forward in a panic, I burst into the house.
お前は金の卵を産むガチョウだ。もう一度天才を産ませてやる。そうすりゃ、俺はまた。
When I pushed open the door, I was greeted by the sight of my father, his eyes bloodshot and clouded with madness, forcibly pressing my mother against the ground. Mom?
Yuuji, てめえちゃんと酒は買ってきたのか?
買
ってきたんなら、そこに置いて、てめえは出てけ。しばらく帰ってくるんじゃねえぞ。
Stop it, Dad. What are you doing to her?
うるせえ、ぶっ飛ばされてえのか。とっととどっか行け。外で遊んでこい、クソガキが。
ユージ、行きなさい。私なら大丈夫だから。
まともに子育てもできなかったお前が一丁前に母親面してんじゃねえよ。
Roaring with anger, my father smacked Mom in the face. Even as she cried out, my mom forced that pathetic excuse for a smile onto her face, her eyes pleading for me to flee. The bitter taste of helplessness in my mouth, I left the bottle of alcohol on the tatami mat, turned my back, and ran out the door. I ran away. I abandoned my mother. I couldn't stop him. I was a child. What else was I supposed to do? The excuses came easily enough, but I was still ashamed of myself. All that talk about helping my mother. In the end, I just deserted her. What if something terrible happened to Mom? Stupid. Something terrible already had happened. Mom was crying. She was crying over her own powerlessness. And I wasn't any different. Even as I watched Mom suffering, I cringed at my father's rage, and then I ran away without doing a thing. Without even trying. At this rate, nothing was ever going to change. No one was ever going to save us. Our neighbors hated trouble. They'd probably slam the door in my face if I asked for help. I thought about going to the police, but if we made this into something serious, we'd end up being forced to move all over again. Just the thought of it was frustrating. And the thought of some bored policeman in a dingy little station saying, "Can't you solve your own family squabbles?" was downright infuriating. What would Kazuki have done at a time like this? Of course, she would have used her head and come up with some clever solution to fix everything, like she always does. But I'm not Kazuki. I'm no genius. Idiots can't solve their own problems in one neat stroke. Still, even an idiot can learn how to blunder their way forward eventually. You know, even if it didn't work the first time, we could just look for another chance to run away from Dad. We just have to start over again from square one, as many times as it took. Holding on to that newfound determination, I stopped in my tracks. Then I headed back toward the house as fast as I could manage. I was worried about my mother. I could see her being beaten, punched, kicked, apologizing again and again, answered by more blows. My imagination urged me on until my legs couldn't keep up. Frustration built inside me with every stride. By the time I reached home, my heart was pounding like an alarm bell, and my mind was simmering with anger. I slipped quietly into the house, trying not to give myself away. And inside I found my mother pinned to the ground underneath my father. Mom?
相変わらずいい体してるぜ、お前は。
The room was filled with a choking animal stink. In the light of the setting sun slanting through the window, I could see my mother's face. Her eyes were unfocused. And when I took in the sight of my father biting at her neck with an expression of deranged pleasure on his face, the first thought to pop into my head was a childish misunderstanding. He's eating her. Stop it! Get off her!
ああ、てめえ何戻ってきてんだよ。しばらく帰ってくんなって言っただろうが。邪魔すんな、このクソガキが。
When I jumped forward instinctively to pull Dad away, he hit me with all of his strength. The ruthless backhand blow smashed into the side of my face as I fell stunned to the ground. I remember feeling some strange object inside my mouth. The instant I realized it was a fragment of a broken tooth, I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, about an hour had passed. The room had grown dim and my vision was blurry. I could only just make out my mother. She was lying perfectly still, her body bruised and battered. I'll kill him. A flash of white-hot anger ran through me. In an instant, the passive thought, I'd wish he'd just die, had been transformed into a concrete urge to kill. Stand up. Fight back. Nothing was ever going to change if we kept running away. Nothing was ever going to change unless I changed myself. No matter how bitter reality might be, I had to face it. I had to fight back. There was no other choice. Kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him! As the words rang out like a siren inside my mind, I reflexively reached out and took the bottle of alcohol, still sitting on the floor where I'd left it. Fierce anger pulsed through me, until it felt like my head would burst, and cutting through it all, I thought I heard my sister's voice.
文字を書いたり箸を持つのは右。ボールを投げたりバッターボックスに立つときは左。じゃあ、人を殺すときはどっちの手？
With my right hand, I lifted the bottle over my father, and then swung it down on the back of his head as hard as I could. A jarring impact ran through my arm as the glass met skull. With a tremendous crashing sound, the bottle shattered against my father's head. Covered in alcohol and jagged fragments of glass, my father let out a few loud groans, then went still. Mom, are you okay? Come on, get up. We have to get out of here. Look at that. Man. I tried to pull her towards the door, but she didn't move. Her face was swollen, covered in vicious dark red bruises, and her eyes were dull and unfocused.
Yuuji.
That was a name my mother used to call me back when I was much, much younger. It was pretty girly, so I didn't really like it at the time. Sometimes it even made me think Mom wanted a girl instead. I remember getting angry every time she used it. Mom, let's get out of here, okay? This time, we'll go somewhere really far away.
そうね。また逃げなきゃね。
In response to my voice, Mom's mouth curved into a weak, strangely resigned grin. Somehow it wasn't quite the same as her usual forced smile.
でもどこまで逃げればいいんだろうね。いつまで逃げればいいのかしら。
As she mumbled those words, her gaze turned to my father, lying quietly on the ground with his back turned to us. He hadn't even twitched since the blow to his
ご
head.
めんね。ゆうちゃんは足が速いから走って逃げなさい。私はこの人が私たちを追ってこれないようにするから先に逃げなさい。
Mom.
お母さん後から行くから。
Mom slowly picked her battered body up off the floor. Taking a small drawstring bag, she slipped in our bank book and seal, added the cash left in her wallet, then hung it around my neck. All the money we'd been saving little by little was in that bank account.
これが私たちの全財産。なくさないようにしっかり持っているのよ。ほら、早く逃げなさい。
Run. To where? Her mouth again pushing itself into a grin, Mom tilted her head absent-mindedly.
そうね。とりあえず、駅かな。
As she mumbled those words, her eyes staring vacantly up at the ceiling, I thought I could smell the reek of death wafting from her body. My mother seemed to be gazing into some far-off place, a place outside the world. I swallowed a wad of spit. It felt like a rock in my throat.
大丈夫？ゆうちゃん、一人で行ける？
The question frightened me for reasons I didn't understand. I nodded my head vigorously. It's fine. I'm not a kid anymore. I can go on my own. When I spoke those words, my mother's face bloomed into a pure, genuine smile. For the first time in so long.
そっか。だったら、一人で頑張って。ほら、もう行きなさい。
It was an innocent expression, a 10-year-old girl's smile. Another jolt of instinctive fear ran through me. I burst out the door and took off toward the station. I ran, trying to escape my own terror. It followed. I could almost hear its footsteps tapping steadily behind me. I ran desperately, gulping down the air, the world a blur, until finally I was in front of the station. After catching my breath, I sat down on a bench to wait for my mother. Reaching up to the drawstring bag around my neck, I squeezed it tightly in my hand. A powerful wave of anxiety pressed down on my chest. What were we gonna do now? It's fine, we'll figure something out. I wasn't really convinced of that. But forcing myself to think it'll all work out somehow was the only way I could keep the fear from crushing me under its own weight. I sat there completely alone, listening to the shrill cries of the insects. By the time I looked up at the clock mounted on the side of the station building, it was already past 7. The air was starting to grow uncomfortably cold. Just as I was beginning to regret not taking my jacket, an ambulance screamed by on the road in front of the station. The startling wail of the siren instantly fanned the flames of my anxiety. Dad must be dead. It wouldn't be surprising. I mean, after all, I hit him as hard as I could. I was trying to kill him. I'd murdered my own father. My God. And then I'd run away and left my mother behind all by herself. What good am I if I can't protect my mom at a time like this? Why was I even born? Throwing myself up off the bench, I set out at a sprint back toward our house. Hold on, Mom, I'm coming. My mother was a weak person. When Kazuki was alive, she'd been indifferent to me. But I wouldn't exist without her. She gave birth to me. She took me with her when she ran. I owed her everything. If I ran away now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Much, much more than having killed my own father. I rushed down the familiar streets that led to our house, wanting nothing more than to see my mother one more time. Just like that day when I sprinted all the way to the canning factory to meet her after work. I ran. There was an ambulance sitting in front of our house. Many onlookers had gathered around it. Voices forced their way into my ears. Stabbed him with a kitchen knife. Apparently it was a murder-suicide. I heard they found a note. Renting a house just to kill yourself in it? Honestly, a nuisance right to the very end. With every whisper, my heart throbbed painfully in my chest. As I elbowed my way through the crowd, some of the people from the neighborhood noticed me and raised their voices in alarm. Ignoring their completely superficial words of concern, I made my way to the front door. A man in an EMT vest stopped me. As I struggled to get past him, two other paramedics made their way outside, carrying a stretcher covered in a white sheet. A man's arm was hanging limply at the side, a cheap gold watch glinted dully on his wrist. Dad really is dead. I killed him. I murdered someone. I murdered my father. I killed him with my own hands. For an instant, the world went dark before my eyes. Dad's corpse was being hauled out of our house like a pile of junk. He died a miserable, undignified death. It was a shock, but at the same time, I felt strangely calm. I was watching strangers carry my father's body away, and yet I felt neither sadness nor pity. It was exactly what he deserved. Now we'd finally be safe. Those were the only thoughts that came to my mind. The reality of his death hadn't really sunk in. My emotions were spinning around so violently that the centrifugal force had carried off all empathy, leaving a cold vacuum behind. The faint sound of creaking wood slipped through my ears and echoed in the emptiness of my mind. What's that noise? The next thing I saw as I stood stock still in the doorway was my mother, hanging from a beam in the ceiling. Even dangling from a rope with her back turned to me, I recognized her instantly. She looked just as she had when I bolted out of the house. The paramedic had his arm around my shoulder. He was trying to drag me out of there, but my eyes were fixed on my mother's corpse, and my feet were rooted to the floor. Another EMT was reaching up to my mother to try and lower her from the ceiling. As he grabbed her leg, my mother's body turned suddenly on the rope. Her wide eyes met mine. My legs turned to water. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Who could? The person who had been my mother was now a thing. An inanimate object. Some part of me probably understood that, but I didn't know how to process it. The first thing I felt wasn't grief or pity. It was simple terror. Far stronger than any I'd ever known. Ah! If this is how it was going to end, we never should have run away in the first place. If this was what was waiting for me, I never should have come back. But I never imagined it could end like this. Not in my worst nightmares. When I closed my eyes, I could feel the contents of my head spinning violently in circles. No, it was the world that was spinning. I was frozen in the very center of hell, and the earth was rotating around me. The world spun, lurching on its tilted axes. Round and round and round. My sister could keep her balance no matter how the world swayed, but she was gone. True despair is a strange thing. It smothers you so completely that you can't even recognize what you're feeling is despair. Round and round and round and round it goes. My eyes wouldn't stop spinning. It was making me sick. I lost consciousness on the spot.
Oi, 大丈夫か君? しっかりしろ!
The paramedics took me into custody and brought me to the hospital. Later, the policeman who came to question me in my bed told me that my mother had left a message behind. After convincing me to run away, she'd written a note stating I murdered my husband, then took her own life. And at the very end of that note, she left me with her usual apologies. Why did it turn out like this? What did we do to deserve any of this? I'm sorry, Yuuji. I'm so sorry. Those were my weak-willed mother's final words, written in the last moment before her fear of reality overwhelmed her fear of death. The policeman told me that my parents' death was being considered a murder-suicide motivated by their overwhelming debts. The paper in my hand was stained with my parents' blood. As I stared down at it, filled with my self-loathing at my utter powerlessness, I felt something inside me snap and break.